Good morning and welcome to Sunrise Daily. It's the day after the holiday. I'm Neil Taibi. Hope you're ready for work.
Did you say the day after the holiday? Some people said, oh, what's that work day in between Thursday and Saturday?
My daughter said, this government is not good. Why would they go and put the school day after 2 days of holiday?
Some people have silently taken it as an extension of their holiday.
Yeah.
Well, whatever it is your case is, if you're back at work, we hope it's a great day for you. Good morning and welcome to Sunrise Daily. I'm Malkwe Yusuf.
Well, it may be a day after the holiday, but for me, thank God it's Friday. Good morning and welcome. I am Bukola Koka.
I think it's worth reiterating that today is not a public holiday, okay? In case you're just acting like it is. It isn't, okay? It is a work day, so get work, except you have genuine reasons anyway. But welcome to the show. I'm Kaidoki Kilu from here in Lagos.
Talking about, I wonder how the holiday went. The holiday went like a flash for us who had to, and for the essential workers across the country, and in some other countries as well that observed holidays for the celebration. We had to continue work because we're essential workers. But talking about essential things, there's that conversation about the electricity tariffs that are supposed to have kicked in from the 1st of July, but the NERC Assistant General Manager Public Affairs, Mr. Michael Faloshe, was quoted in the media as saying that the Commission has not approved any hike in tariffs yet. But there is a commission, or rather an agency, that has gone ahead to confirm that there's likely to be a situation in the coming years, more rains and floods, and that everybody should get ready. But how ready are we? Last year it was a major situation in certain states across the country. Kogi State, for instance, was cut off from the Federal Capital Territory. I mean, if you were going to travel across into the Federal Capital Territory through Kogi State, you had to wait for days on end for the waters to go down before you could drive through that part. And I mean, the agencies, NIMET and the hydrological agency, have already talked about the fact that there are likely to be more floods this year. The question is, how prepared? With all the warnings, those living in the flood-prone areas should move to higher ground. Trademore Estate, case in point in Abuja, just a few hours of rain, place was flooded, houses submerged. A community in Bayelsa, again, flooded, houses are maybe not so serious as the Trademore Estate, but these things are going to happen. We keep getting these predictions every year, and it appears nothing is done. Some have asked, what is the solution to the perennial flooding? Is it dams? It could help. Is it dredging? Some say that's the major way to go. Who will bail the cat? Okay.
Are you putting that question? That's a rhetorical question, by the way, to me at least, but certainly not to government officials. I mean, who's going to do the work? If I'm going to interpret, who bailed the cat as who's going to do the work? I'm bailing the cat, or we are bailing the cat by bringing these issues to the fore. Don't forget last year when this occurred, I mean, the fact that there was flood in Kogi meant that, Kogi is the confluence town. It's also the major transit point between the north and the south of the country. It meant that the northern part of the country was effectively cut off from the south. And as a result, a lot of essentials that were coming from the north to the south, especially in terms of food items, couldn't get down to the south. And the same way for essential items coming from the south, to the north, especially fuel. So as a result of what happened in Kogi, places like Abuja and a number of other states didn't have fuel for days. And as a result, it caused really heavy queues at the filling stations. Well, which of course later on went to transit to other things. I mean, we still saw queues even after the floods had subsided. But these are the untoward effects that, not nipping something in the bud can cause. You've heard that famous saying, a stitch in time
saves nine.
Saves nine. That's what they say, But when it's not done, there is that domino effect on everything else. And now we're being warned again I know that the flooding we saw in 2022, we haven't seen its like since 2012. When many parts of this country were devastated as a result of, unprecedented flooding from rains and also the release of water from the Lagdo Dam in Cameroon. So there have been questions as to what conversations are we having in that regard. What are our expectations this year with regards to flood? Have we been able to mitigate some of the effect of what happened last year? We know that farmers, as a result of the flooding, lost a lot of valuables. I mean, their farms were flooded, their crops, they couldn't harvest their crops as a result of the flooding that happened. What are the preparations for this year? It's a real big question. And we know that shortly after that, we entered the political season full swing. So it was very difficult for, let's say, those who had the responsibility to really concentrate on what was happening. Instead, you find a lot of, political office holders were junketing, trying to campaign, etc., etc. Now, in many states, you have new political leaders in office, and they've been elected they've been inaugurated just a few weeks before the peak of the rainy season. But these kinds of matters should be occupying the attention right now. If an area in the FCT, which has consistently experienced the sort of flooding we saw just last week, could be flooded in that manner, and the chances are very high that it could happen again. We understand that Trademore has now been declared a disaster zone so that it can get the sort of focus, it can get the sort of attention that it deserves. What are the plans of others, like state CEOs, state governors, to ensure that their state doesn't fall victim to what happened last year? Where are we? Are there any funds in the ecological funds? Because we know that we're supposed to have some money put aside to be able to, take some,
like that.
Yes, to be able to take some steps in that regard. Are there conversations? I know that largely right now, the major conversation is on the economy. Especially with the removal of fuel subsidy, the Naira float, etc. But we also know that if another major flooding occurs, it could have an even more devastating consequence on the personal economies of those who will be affected. And I mean, that will be all of us, by the way. You can imagine scarcity on top of this fuel price hike. I mean, I can't even begin to picture it. So it's going to affect everybody. So I'm hoping that whilst we're talking about, ameliorating the effects of all the, policies, economic policies that are currently being taken, we also have to take into cognizance nature and what is currently happening in nature and what it could possibly do, on our environment and, by extension, the economy. Bukola and Coyote.
Well, Malpa, I couldn't agree more, except to also add that, flooding and its impact, the many consequences, they're a major economic issue which we must continue to present before the newly elected public officials. Because of the attendant consequences, you just reminded us about how food and other basic items, particularly fuel, were met in between the north and south, in the advent of the peak of the 2022 flood. So we must remind the elected public officials that especially who have a penchant for investing in capital expenditure, that this is also a very, very important work to be done because it also affects the people. And what's the major work of government, within that all-important context of the social contract? It is to ensure the safety of lives and property. We recall how the National Emergency Management Agency told us about the numbers of deaths recorded last year as a result of the 2022 floods. So what will be done? What's the plan? The projections of the newly elected public officials as far as mitigating flooding is concerned. The Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs told us last year that we lost, that's about $6.68 billion to the 2022 floods. We recall how even a major industry, Olam Rice, lost, a lot of its resources to the 2022 flood. So these are some of the issues that the newly elected public officials must explore as they begin to look at, ways. And don't forget also that that battle on the Water Resources Bill has been won by the governors who didn't want an interference in the management of, waters, from the federal government. So they must, be strategic about expending the ecological fund. It's a major intervention that the governors must work with regionally rather than individually. So it should be a huge point of conversation between the Nigerian Governors Forum. Kayode.
It's very interesting. I like the fact that we're putting figures to it, at least quoting from the previous government and also from the previous government. In fact, I think it was last month, just before the Muhammadu Buhari administration elapsed, there was a presidential flood committee, right? And they gave a figure, said that Nigeria will need about 3.4 trillion naira to tackle flood disasters across the country. I mean, if you do the math, if we lost $6 billion last year as a result of flooding, I will need 3.4 trillion naira. I mean, if I get my math correct, it's cheaper to prevent flood, okay, than what you would eventually lose as a result of the flood. Sort of. I mean, just looking at those figures on face value. And something hit me. By the way, that Presidential Flood Committee did a report. They had recommendations, and I wonder where it is with this administration. Again, I hope we have that institutional memory. I hope we're able to, connect all of those works and pick them up. Not, we start all over again, and then we have to go through all of those floods, because these are lives at stake here. And, the committee made something, a very, very interesting point that, in actual fact, federal, state, and local governments have not invested adequately in flood management infrastructure. What do they do instead? They invest on post-disaster projects. So that has been the case, medicine after death. And it's not really hard. What do you need? The usual early warning system, dynamics of rainfall, catchment characteristics, and the rest. I mean, some will say it's quite simple. At least we know the solution to these challenges. Maybe not 100% solution, but at least to reduce the effect. And one more thing, we need to have conversations with residents of those areas. It's really not easy for them to up and leave their residence. I know people will say, well, do you want to die? But come to think of it, we're in a situation where, it is really tough. I mean, look at those images. It just caught them unawares. They probably got the warnings, maybe not, but these are residential areas. This is where people do their businesses. So I think it's important to have some sort of conversation with them and say, well, is there a way we can work around these things? Because believe me, it is difficult to just up and leave where you stay for what? I mean, most times they're not sure where to go anyway, but that's where we're at this morning, guys.
It's the consequences of not taking actions cannot be underplayed, cannot be played down. So really, something has to be done about this perennial situation. Where are the dams? Where are the dredged waterways? Maybe that will make a difference beyond just moving people from one point to the other. As Kayode has mentioned, it's really not comfortable and not something to look forward to for people who have been in a particular place to just up and move every year. So every year that happens. But let's hope that something would be done once and for all. And some have said that it will not, government can't handle it alone. But then there are other companies that can. I mean, sand is needed for glass factories. And I do know that we have glass factories in this country, glass industries in this country, in the Delta. So can we dredge our water channels? Can we be more focused? The last time a contract was given for dredging of any water channel, I think it was in, 99 or thereabout, or 2000. And I understand that they set up equipment after a few days. They're gone. So can we go back and revisit that situation? While we're thinking on that, we'll take a moment and come back to look at what the dailies are saying. Just stay with us. And now let's look at what the headlines are in some of the national newspapers. Just before we came back here, we were talking about the quality of sand in certain parts of Nigeria. Nigeria is blessed. We have beautiful sand. I don't know. Someone will say, what do you mean by we have? Yes, we do. Alluvial soils we have. Or should I carry on? There are different kinds of soils across the country, and each of them are peculiar and very rich. But let's not go there. So we start off with the Guardian newspaper, and this is what they lead with. Towards first 100 days. In 30 days of honeymoon, Tinubu's sweeping reforms leave Nigerians poorer, agitated. It's the big story. Page 4 and 5. And then you see the graphic illustration there. High points of 30 days. Let's see. Fuel subsidy removal. FX Naira floating. Handling of the National Assembly's leadership matter. Appointment of service chiefs. MFL's arrest. Proposed VAT on diesel. 1,000 Naira charges on vehicle ownership. EFCC boss removal. Proposed new tariff on electricity. Students' loan scheme. And the question, but where are the palliatives? That's what the Guardian is leading with. And you see the picture of the president there. How would you describe that expression in his face?
Yeah, I'm looking at it. I can't see it clearly, though. I can't see it clearly from here.
Pensive? Anticipatory?
Looks like I know what I'm doing.
Okay. Okay. We're going somewhere.
That's how it looks, yeah.
Okay. And above that, I have this one. Soft drinks, chewing gum, toothpaste pose cancer risk.
Yes, because of the sweetener.
So, WHO is warning. Check page 7, news page 7 for that. The NIN, National Identity Numbers, hit 101 million, 56.7% allocated to males. Check business page 15 for details on that. Quite a number of stories here. Catholic bishops reject bill on for council on Christian education. News page 3. Some people smiled and some laughed when they heard this statement yesterday. I invoked Emilokon's spirit to win despite cashless policy, says Tinubu. News page 6 has more on that. And Abuja residents lament growing rate of Almajiri. Metro page 9 has that. That Almajiri conversation is still not over. It's still there. And as I say, environmentalists decry fresh oil spillage in rivers. News page 22, just like they're decrying the possible floods that are likely to come up. And that's it from The Guardian.
Leadership Friday has this. Citing gains of reforms, Tinubu asks Nigerians to endure baby steps of pain. That's the lead story on the front page of Leadership Friday. Says subsidy removal, single exchange rate in nation's interest. Reiterates commitment to fulfilling campaign promises. So you find details on page 4 of the paper. Quite a number of, visits he made yesterday, visiting the current governor of Lagos and visiting the traditional rulers in Ogun State. Look at the picture there, very telling. He was the first governor, that's the president, was the first governor of Lagos in the 4th Republic. And then you also have his successors right there, presenting him a gift, which is a model of the Lagos light blue rail. So quite a lot to share in this one picture, especially when you also see the immediate past governor of Lagos, Akinwumi Ambode. But take a look at a number of other stories there. Naira now undervalued after free float. That's according to the Bank of America. So it does look like the Naira could be set to gain with this sort of statement. Page 19 is where you see details. Opposition senators oppose Tambuwal as minority leader. It's a page 4 read. So the politics is still going on in the National Assembly as not all the principal officers have been appointed just yet. Leadership Friday, that's where we leave it for the paper.
And turn to this Nigeria, which also leads with the, hues and cries over the economy, particularly between or among the political parties. Listen to this. Presidency fires back at PDP LP over alleged anti-people policies, accuses them of being envious. And you see right under that, of course, Mark already trailed on it, but I can't also resist the urge to talk about, the trajectory of the relationship between the first governor of the Fourth Republic and their predecessors. This was coming sooner rather than later, particularly after the visit of the current governor to his predecessor, that's Governor Sanwo-Olu, during the 60th birthday of former Governor Akinwumi Ambode. But it's also quite telling as well about the nature of Nigerian politics. Take a look at other stories right beside the inset. Fubara, that's the governor of River State, directs urgent probe into collapsed building. Besides the flooding in Okrika yesterday, there was also a case of a building collapse. Under that, you see also this one. Again, CAN condemns beheading in Sokoto over blasphemy. National Assembly contention for their leadership positions continue, and this is the way this is captioned. Minority leadership positions tear opposition senators apart. Above the nameplate, or right beside the nameplate, rising fuel prices aiding severe hunger in Nigeria. That's ascribed to the United Nations, and it's a page 10 read, just in case you're wondering about the details. Let's leave it there for this Nigeria.
New Telegraph has this for you. Tinubu to Nigerians, endure. I'm in no hurry to fix the nation. So that's the angle New Telegraph decides to go with that story. The writer promises positive change, calls for unity, notes he's currently taking baby steps of pain, says he invoked the spirit of Emile Ocon to win election despite cashless policy. Buhari didn't ask Tinubu not to investigate him, Shehu. So the former president's former spokesperson has been speaking, quite...
A lot.
A lot, really.
Yeah.
And, it looks like this is going to continue for a while. So this is the latest statement. Buhari didn't ask Tinubu not to investigate him. So the question will be, is President Tinubu investigating former President Buhari? Why did this come up in the first place? But hey, it's page 2 on the New Telegraph newspaper this morning, and of course that picture is right there on the front page as well. But just below that picture, so this one, DHQ gives service chiefs seniors Monday deadline to resign. Again, you have to now look behind the story. What is behind the story? Are they refusing to resign, or are they just following the due process? Are they saying, well, I've not gotten the proper notification? What exactly is playing out here? Yes, I'm just giving you all of the possibilities.
Uncertainty about life after retirement. What are they going home to?
Well, some will always say it's always inevitable. The moment you get that promotion, you know that there's a possibility something might change and you might actually be...
It's inevitable, actually, particularly within the armed forces, that, senior military officers would exit. But
sometimes with no heads up at all.
What are they going to?
I think that's a question for a lot of people who are on the verge of retiring or who have retired already. A couple of more. CBN to roll out 187 billion naira maturing treasury bills today. Yes, so it's not a public holiday again, in case you're wondering. Let's leave it there for New Telegraph.
And the Daily Trust. Parents, students cry foul as varsities hike fees. When it rains, it pours, they say. That say cost of living unbearable, withdrawal last option. Those students protest over 300% increment. Increase inevitable. That's coming from the authorities. But does it have to be 300%? I do know that conversation has been there, that Nigerian students pay lower than any other schools in the world. I mean, in some quarters, that's the argument. But does it have to be 300%? Can't it be gradual?
You say varsities, though.
Yes. All right. right, so that's a story the Daily Trust is leading with. Above that, seaport terminal operators jack up cargo handling charges by 45%. I'll say that again. When it rains, it pours. Outrage over Quran desecration in Sweden. Naira now undervalued after float. That's coming from the Bank of America, page 5. Then the picture there speaks of hope.
Yeah, indeed.
Children having fun speaks of hope. When you see that, you just look forward to better days ahead. And then Idil Kabir, children having fun at the Millennium Park in Abuja. Now, of course, our reporter was there yesterday, and from his findings, the numbers were lower than usual. But then, the few that were there were catching their fun. FGOK's vehicle importation via land borders. Would that reduce the cost of vehicles or just increase the amount, the number of people paying for vehicle ownership as we go along every year? Buhari never asked Tinubu not to probe him. Kayode mentioned that in the other paper, but there it is again, Daily Trust. Bloomberg rates Dangote richest man in Africa. Hope for TB vaccine in 100 years as Welcome Gates Foundation fund trial. And that's it from Daily Trust.
Okay, Vanguard Newspapers has this. Why I invoked spirits of freedom in Ogun. That's according to Tinubu. Explains how he invoked spirit of Emilokon twice before February 25 election to overcome obstacles. Interesting. I didn't know that Emilokon. Well, people say that, there's power in the tongue and, you should be careful what you say. Well, the president certainly knew what he was saying, apparently, when he said Emilokon. So this is his explanation right now. Says cashless policy or not, he was sure of victory. Optimistic about positive change, urges Nigerians to endure baby steps of pain. Okay, page 8 is where you get to see details. The question is, how is he rating that is baby steps? Are there adult steps of pain to come, sir? Just wondering. Page 8 is where you find details. You have a number of other stories. NAS principal officers tension as competing camps await Tinubu. APC's nod. NAFDAC warns Nigerians against contaminated Sprite in circulation. So I saw this yesterday, and I don't know how, seriously people are taking it and how, you might want to read details of the story to know just, maybe there's a batch, maybe there is a type of container to identify the Sprite that could be contaminated, but NAFDAC is warning against Sprite that could be contaminated. How about they withdrawing it from the market? If they know that there was a batch that was contaminated, then they had better do something drastic to see how they can withdraw it from the market, lest people get poisoned. You have a number of other stories. Nigeria's intra-African trade dips 12% to 842.6 billion naira in first quarter of 2023. I have a number of other stories. Mr. and Mrs. is also there. Mr. lamenting about cabal. Just pay, your in-laws their dues and you shall have peace, mister. Let's leave it there for Vanguard Newspapers and also leave it there for our paper review this beautiful Friday morning. We'll be right back to get into the conversation. Please stay with us.
That for us to benefit truly, a certain amount must be withdrawn. These monies must now be jointly managed between the federal, the state, and even the local government, so that we can put this on project. Whether we want to use it on hospitals, or we want to invest on more roads, or we want to invest, which I'm recommending, more rails, so we can connect more. And why have I said rail? What you will see immediately from July is you're going to see even higher increase in inflation, not because of commodity imports, but mostly because of food inflation. As I talk to you, the major driver, the major reason, the major cause of inflation is food inflation at over 24%. Now, what do? We need to connect farm-producing zones by rail. We need to connect them so that cost of bringing this food to urban center, town or cities or villages will reduce significantly. And I can tell you that if you remove 7 trillion naira from your budget every year for the next 10 years, that is 70 trillion naira. I can tell you this will do a lot. And I hope that authority will do this. Well, I'm not just to be biased for a section of the country or, Nigeria come with a lot of, sometimes you wonder why we talk more about religion and we talk about ethnic group. But, for us to say this is a Nigerian project and we want to invest back into the country, that time we are making the long run get closer to our people while they are still alive. And I hope that authorities will do this. From 2024, perhaps when President Tinubu submits his first budget in office.
And that's where we're starting off from, a look at the economy, the fallout from all the policies the president has initiated in the 30 days that he's been in office. I mean, we talked about some of the high points of that period: subsidy removal, floating of the naira, handling of the National Assembly issues, appointment of service chiefs, proposed VAT on diesel, and amongst many other policies, and how all of this weighing on the economy. Also, that other conversation about certain professional bodies that were being funded by the federal government. How would that all work out? If federal government stops funding these bodies, where would those funds be going into? And how is it that those bodies were even being funded by the federal government, yet they still collect dues from their members? But all that will be part of the conversation we're having with Mr. Kyari Bukka, who's the former chairman of the Nigeria Economic Summit Group, CEO Africa Operations Inlax Limited, and who joins us virtually from Maiduguri. Mr. Bukka, thank you for joining us. Also joining us is Dr. Paul Ikele, who is the Registrar, Chief Executive Officer, Institute of Business Development, who joins us also virtually from Lagos. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Ikele. Let me start off with Mr. Bukka. The Nigeria Economic Summit Group has always spoken about the Nigerian economy over time and proposed several measures that should be taken as regards moving the economy forward. So let's start from that point, and let's hear your overview or your take on what's been going on in the Nigerian economy since this administration took off 30 days ago. Mr. Bukka and Dr. Kelly, well, I wanted to start off from the point of view, let's get your point of view as regards the takeoff point of this administration, the policies that have come in, especially you, Dr. Bukka, because the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, of which you've been a part of, and you headed at one time, has always spoken about the Nigerian economy, how to move it forward, some of the things that should be put aside and some of the things that should be taken on. What is your take on the move so far?
Good morning. The story of Nigeria is changing. The beauty of the things that we've had, as jolting as they were, the directions, generally speaking, are all in the right direction. The speed with which the announcements were made were commendable. Now, of course, naturally, with these, there has to be clarity of those policy pronouncements, particularly even on the FX-related activities. Of course, the reaction of the world is a positive one, overwhelmingly positive all around the world. And it also gives us what I call not only confidence, which is what every paper is mentioning, but it also begins to restore trust of the Nigerian monetary policy and the fiscal stance. Of course, we will talk about the fiscal policies down the road. But the most interesting things are that those are elements of how a tough decision must be made by the very top, which is the president, in executing his policy pronouncements. There are documents, particularly the one by the Policy Advisory Council indicated all of those. Of course, the timing are perfect. Now, what we need to look at is that, of course, with those announcements and the activities, the implementation, there will be hardship to the economy. But I think it is better to go through the hardship rather than to deny ourselves and bury our heads in the sand, so to speak, and not be able to accomplish much. The last 8 years have been, economically speaking, filled up with uncertainties, somersaults, lack of clarity, and within a few weeks, all of those have now been put into their place. Now, of course, talking about these, there has to be follow-ons, and those follow-ons are going to be the determinant of what we want to accomplish as a nation, because the growth trajectory for Nigeria should be in double digits. And for us to do that, there are certain tough decisions that have to be made, particularly where it comes to, say, for example, implementation of the Orosanya report on cutting down the ministries, departments, and agencies within the government, consolidating some of those assets, and in some instances, even reform that would need to be tapped into the PIA, such that NNPC as it is, which is NNPC Limited, being commercialized, it should be separated, but then there are a lot of assets under that need to be gotten rid of, or at least partially privatized, such that private sector management need to come in with proper governance structure to make sure that those are in order. Because if you look at what we have today in the world, in the last year, 2022, top 10 entities globally in terms of market capitalization are either technology companies or energy companies. And that basically indicates that those energy companies, including one from Brazil and one from Saudi Arabia, indicates that even if it is the government-owned entity, if it is professionally and well-governed, the value that it's going to create is immense.
Okay.
So those are some of those components. But then, of course, for somebody in technology, myself, I would also see a faster implementation of e-government. That does a number of things. It brings in efficiency, it reduces costs, and in the process, we will have a more optimal government and streamlined to the extent that the cost of governance overall is going to be manageable in the medium to long term.
Thank you, Mr. Bukka. Let's hear from you, Dr. Kele, especially considering the fact that before now, Nigeria was considered the poverty capital of the world. And with these new policies, some have described Nigeria, I mean, the World Bank report has said that Nigeria has slipped into poverty in the last 6 months, Dr. Kele. But yet, many will say that Nigeria's economy is headed in the right direction.
Thank you very much. And thank you for having me in the program. But Nigeria's economic system has been wobbling in view of the implementation of policies. And it's not as if those policies were badly initiated, but during the implementation, it becomes a bit difficult to have them put in place. And that is why decisions and policies of government immediately will start to affect the entire population. Nigeria has a very large population, and Nigeria runs a middle mixed economic system. And in that economic system, Nigeria has 2 sectors in that economic system. We have the formal system and the formal system. And if you check that economic system, the informal system has about 65% of the entire sector. And it is not properly organized, positioned, so that any little effect or decision or policy of the government immediately has an immediate effect on the population. For example, the removal of subsidies from petroleum, which actually was captured, was not captured in the budget of 2023, and it was planned by the then Minister of Finance and Economic Development, Ahmed Zenab, stated that they were removing it from the budget of 2023, and although His Excellency President Bola Tinubu, when he came in, announced it during his inauguration, you can see that the effect, the cost, the fuel prices skyrocketed within that short period. And because the informal sector, they don't have a propensity to save. They live on what they want, that some people, it's based on what they earn today, they spend it. So if there is a gap or a change or a deviation from what should have been coming, immediately it will affect their living standards. And that is why within this scenario, even when, according to the minister, that they were providing palliatives of to 10 million persons, so probably get about 10,000, 5,000 naira. But that wouldn't even solve it. You see, Nigerians, some of them are living already below poverty level. And any policy that will immediately affect their day-to-day activities will impinge on them. And of course, they will fall into poverty. And with the population, an uncontrolled system of administration, of course, the potency is there that the economy, the population will continue to get poorer. Even the system of governance is quite fine. We have 3 tiers of government. We have the local government, we have the state, and we have the federal government. And in our executive administration, we have the executive, we have the judiciary, we have the National Assembly. And you can see in all these components, from the local government, they are represented up to both the National Assembly and to the executive. Why is there gaps? Why is it that the implementation of policies instantly affect the ordinary man? It's because the flow of those policies is not properly harnessed. Either it will be started at the top level. Before it gets down to the top level, it will not get there. And that is a question of corruption. A question of corruption. Some individuals will make policies and they will be on the top and ensure that they collect whatever they can collect, but it will not get down to the poor person. So, for example, part of the reasons for removing fuel subsidy was that most of our petroleum products are being exported to our neighbor states in West Africa because it is cheaper in Nigeria, and there they make profit at the expense of their citizens. So it is a terrible situation, and I think government should look at it. Government should look at what they can do to correct the informal sector and maybe to create SMEs, micro businesses, and then have a consistent, sustainable record collections to ensure that if there are deviations, it will be neat at the board.
Indeed, I mean, it's certainly, excuse me, having a very, very adverse effect on businesses and individuals, especially at the micro level. But when you look at the macroeconomics of what is currently happening, as Mr. Booker referred to, at the top, on the surface of it, do you think that the reforms that we're currently undergoing, if you want to call them reforms, if you see them as such, do you think that they are necessary to reset certain parameters within the economy? That's for you, Dr. Ekele.
Yes, when you talk about macroeconomy, you are looking at the larger economy, and there must be derivative basis for determining those macroeconomies, and there must be benchmarks, okay, that will build it up to that level. And of course, if you see the micro system that developed with that macroeconomy, it is very, very key and important that a systematic approach has to be employed to ensure that all the elements that were being considered is entangled in the base.
Oh, Dr. Keller, I don't think I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay, I'm hearing you. Okay, go ahead. Now, question.
Okay, fantastic. Your last response, I was asking your own opinion. Do you think that the current reforms are necessary? I didn't quite get your response on that.
Okay, the current reforms. I didn't hear you very well, sorry.
Yeah, I was asking if you think that the current, I don't know if you want to call them reforms or reset button. Do you think that, it is a necessary push? Do you think it is important that, for instance, the Naira be floated? Do you think it's important that fuel subsidy be taken out, considering just how it has ballooned beyond control? What are your thoughts on it? Do you think that we could still have kept it in place, because of the adverse effects it could have, especially at the micro level? What are your thoughts on the larger picture, on the picture at the top? What are your thoughts on it?
Very well. Thank you very much. You see, reforms, the reforms are quite well. But you see, the approach of instilling those reforms is the question mark I have. For example, the fuel subsidies, which had been planned from last year, that from current year, that it will be taken up from the budget. And there were palliatives already planned by the government. And once that is done, immediately the government went ahead and said that Naira is going to be floated. And what do you mean by floating the Naira? The floating Naira is allowing the powers of demand and supply and the foreign exchange market to determine what Naira is. Knowing that Nigeria is a mono-economic country, we are only dependent on petroleum products. And these petroleum products are crude products. Nigeria has not attained a level where the byproduct of the petroleum products can be harnessed and utilized. It is still being exported, processed, and brought back to the country. So some of the policies have to be planned to ensure that implementing it will not affect the livelihood of the citizens. Of course, first of the removal, I accept it is the best time so that the savings government will make will now be utilized to create opportunities, job creation, and then training, ensuring that manpower development is put in place, ensuring that the environmental development of the economy, look at the infrastructures, those savings will be put into it. For example, Nigeria is more or less an agro economy. So we have a lot of agricultural products and services, and most of them are not just produced like that. They need some infrastructure, good roads. They need a way so that those goods and services can be either stored or be processed so that it will add one or two value to the system. Okay. Remember, too, Nigeria have not started exporting any finished products for now. Although of course, we have the potential.
So, Dr. Keller, just a moment. If I get you correctly, you're saying that it is necessary, but not in the manner that it has been done. Is that what you're saying?
That is my point, yes.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, so let me go to Mr. Bukka then, and, because he seems a bit more optimistic. He thinks that there is clarity. But let me ask Mr. Bukka about the level of transparency. Are we aware of just how in debt we are, or maybe just how bad our economic situation is, and what we really need to, do to get out of it? By doing, I don't mean that. I don't just mean the steps that have been taken so far. I mean what these steps are meant to do for our economy, the goals that they should be achieving. Do you think that we have sufficient clarity in that regard?
Let me go back a bit before I address the issue of the clarity. One is that the situation Nigeria has found itself right now, or on May 29th, is you have options. One is to not do anything, and I don't think that is possible. It's not a feasible option at all. meaning you continue to borrow at a very reckless rate. You have multiple exchange rates. You have a fuel subsidy that you cannot underwrite sustainably. Now, it requires political will to do what Mr. President did, which is to basically say, look, you know, it's like a household. You are earning 1,000 naira, and your bill is 4,000 naira. You're borrowing 3/4 of what you need to spend every day. It's not sustainable. You have to do something. Certain things has to change. So the decision is great. Now, there is a need for education and clarity and transparency. I think under the circumstances, the presentation, the communication need to be incessant so that people begin to understand and empathize with where Mr. President is. Now, then the second thing is, after these announcements, of course, there is market reactions. Market has reacted. Speaking about what has happened globally, it's positive. What has happened even domestically, the day of the announcement of the fuel subsidy, the stock market rose by, leaps and bounds. But then come down to the nitty-gritty. Now, those are all macro issues. When you now look at how it will affect the average citizen, we do know it's going to be very difficult. I think there were a few newspaper headlines we read this morning, which indicated that even Mr. President is aware that there is going to be hardship. Now, what needs to then happen is how can we meaningfully, efficiently, and efficaciously present palliatives, and those palliatives must go to the right people. It's not a matter of cutting a check and giving somebody money, because that itself is not sustainable. It has been subject to abuse in the past. We all know what had happened in the past. And therefore, we need to come up with solutions. And in some instances, it is better to have what I call social infrastructure, whether it is making transportation cheaper by presenting quote unquote, what I would say, probably a certain form of subsidy for transportation or whatever, or moving of goods and services. In that way, the food inflation or certain specific targeted areas, inflation can be addressed. The other thing is overall the general inflation in the country. Now, the monetary tool that one needs to use to contain inflation is raising of interest rates. And of course, we already have interest rates that are high. So we are in a catch-22 situation as a country. I do not envy any of the economic managers, be they on a list somewhere coming in or have already been appointed as SAF to monetary policy and all of that. I don't envy their position, because you have to, you're going to be having a balancing, contending negative forces, or rather counterintuitive forces that you need to deal with in terms of having that clarity of communication that comes out. But some of the things that have been shared and some of the documents that we've seen in terms of the short-term, medium-term, and long-term plans, they are fantastic. And the bane of it is in the execution. And we need to actually go through ruthlessly in terms of collapsing MDAs, merging some, mothballing others. There are some that have outlived their usefulness, and those we need to be candid with ourselves and shut those down. Will that affect jobs? Yes, certainly it will. If we are buying this mantra of hardship, the hardship should cut across both ways, both from the center, meaning the federal government, MDAs, as well as the way it affects economy. And by the way, when it is open and transparent in terms of FX allocation and all of that, the market becomes efficient. And when markets are efficient, even something as simple as diaspora remittance will probably go to what I would call its natural level, which probably might be around 30 or 35 billion per year inflow coming into the country, rather than the sub 20 billion that we've been seeing in the last 4 or 5 years. So essentially what that means is that Nigeria is going to be open for business. Nigeria become an attractive destination on the continent. Mind you, there is one other thing that has been done across the continent, which Nigeria ought to be in a position to take advantage of, and that is the Africa Free Trade, Continental Free Trade Agreement. Nigeria should be in the center of things in terms of making it so that we will be a hub for manufacturing, we will be a hub for services, and in so doing, the economy's growth trajectory is going to be high. I mean,
Mr. Booker, sorry to interrupt you. Sorry to interrupt you. I'm sure these are the hopes. These are the expectations that people have, that they hope that, you know, these reforms, you know, will be able to bring their way. But I'm sure my colleagues in Lagos have more questions for you. I certainly do have follow-ups, but they need to get their questions through.
Well, thank you very much, Mark. But a very important conversation, so you'll understand why we need to really dissect this as much as we can. But let me take this to Dr. Ekele. I had a follow-up for Mr. Booker too, but just bring in Dr. Ekele in on this one. Because Mr. Booker was talking about the inflation, trying to cut the inflation down. And if you look at the recent reports, entrenched inflation drove 4 million into poverty in 5 months. And the projection is that if the right decisions are not taken, over 7 million people will be driven into poverty further if the right steps are not taken as a result of the subsidy removal and some of the other policy decisions. So the president just yesterday spoke about, his trajectory, the decisions he's making. And he says, well, he's taking baby steps and he's not in a hurry. And Mr. Booker had said that if there's anything we need to have double-digit economic growth. The projection is that we'll have 3.3% by the end of the year. And that is not the double digit we're looking for. We don't want a decimal point in between the double. We need at least 10. So if the president says, well, I'm in no hurry. And I recall the former president, when he started, there was that term, Baba go slow. And a lot of people were saying, well, we need someone to hit the ground running. That expression has come up time and again. So how do you maybe put that in context? Because a lot of people expect that things will be done in quick succession, will move swiftly. But he says, hey, I'm taking baby steps. I'm in no hurry. Do you understand that fully in the context of where we're in, or you think maybe he means something else?
Thank you very much. Yeah, you see, every government actually has good intentions for that citizen, especially when there are needs, there are gaps. But in the case of Nigerian system or Nigerian scenario, some of those policies comes when its petition has been, people have lost hope of getting it. And when it comes, it goes into like throwing water in a well that drains up, or using a basket to get water. However, if the government can systematically plan with the system to a sustainable data collection. Of course, we know Nigeria has been borrowing from World Bank, international finance corporations. Can Nigeria look at some of the policies of those organizations? For example, World Bank policy says to end extreme poverty, and again, to build a prosperity in a sustainable way. How can Nigeria key into it? At times, statements made by the president or the governors are policy statements. And it is now left for the aides, for the sector, or for the organization to put that into workforce. My worry is, before those statements are being made, is there a proper study? Is there an analysis? Is there an environmental scanning? The scenario, is it possible? or it's just a white elephant pronouncement. Because you see, the livelihood of the citizens actually matters. In fact, though Nigeria is looking at politics as a business, but to me, politics is not a business. Politics is a service to the system. So if the economy, the citizens are well nurtured, if they are provided for, and they have their day-to-day activities and be able to do those key things, which is their profession, for example, the farmers, the workers, and everybody works and pay to be taxation to the economy. And there is a basic provision. Then, whatever policy the government brings, of course, will flow. That is it. And that is why once some of these new policies come into place, it will throw the entire system into rowdy, and people will be complaining. As we speak now, people are apprehensive that the electricity tariff will increase any moment from now, and people they were advised to go ahead and buy more credit. How, if you have no savings, will you buy and keep? And these things, why is it that plans are just taken at a short notice? We have a planning system. We have a short-term plan. We have a long-term plan. We're talking about macroeconomic issues. So remembering that we are dealing with the populace, Nigerians of diverse nature.
Okay, Dr. Kelly.
Okay, the segment that might feel comfortable with the incentive, the new decision, are very minute to the larger economic system. Because the majority of Nigeria, like I said, in our economic system, we have the formal and informal system. The informal systems have problems because they're not regulated, they're not cared for, they work to earn their living. And changes in that area can affect their life.
Right.
You know.
If I could just comment now, Dr. Kelly. By the way, the electricity tariff conversation, I mean, what we have now is no approval has been given for that just yet. There still needs to be more clarity, but so far, what we know is that approval hasn't been given, so it looks like that is not going ahead. But let me rephrase that same question, this time for Mr. Booker. And I remember you said Nigeria is open for business. Well, let's properly situate the Nigeria that it is right now. For the inflation, which looks like one of our major challenges, right? The CBN, the monetary policy, we've since increased, our interest rate by 700 basis points since last year, mid last year, and I think May last year, thereabouts. And the inflation is again not easily explained by the global supply chain crisis. That's the inflation in Nigeria. And you called it a catch-22 situation, sort of. I mean, we've done different things, and it looks like it is not quite working. So my question is, regarding the president's statement, what kind of movement do you think the Nigerian economy needs? Do we need quick, swift movement, or as the president says, he's not marching in a hurry? Is that what the Nigerian economy needs right now? Slow and steady, or swiftly?
There are things that can be done swiftly. It may not necessarily be directly correlating to some of the items we're discussing. For example, inflation and the effects of inflation are going to be hitting us every day. And in some instances, it requires certain activities that we have to do in the economy to bring down, for example, food inflation, right? Because if the average Nigeria's food on the table, when you look at it, the segment that can be attributed to imported food is probably not as large as one would expect. I'm now discounting the high net worth individuals whose probably food baskets might be on the higher end. But when you look at that, then it means that our agriculture need to be in a manner that is more growing at a faster rate than the inflation rate. And the yield from our agricultural productions also must be sufficiently growing. And where I am, by the way, I'm in my degree in the northeast corner of the country, some of the conversations, even though anecdotal, that I'm having with people, especially some of the district heads, is that even the few attempts at going out to the farms are met with security challenges. Now, that is not a good sign in terms of arresting long-term inflation, especially food inflation, when the bread at the food basket of the country is not safe for you to walk out and go and farm. So I think some of the things that have been pronounced, some of the strategic documents of the government, or rather the party that came into government, indicates to me that the issue of security is important, the issue of agriculture is important. But these are things that take time for one to feel the effect of those. So those are some of the elements. So if we must move fast, we must move fast in addressing the security challenges as quickly as possible. We must move fast in consolidating the MDAs, because there is no reason why the government is spending so much money on operating expenses when you can take certain moves within a period of 90 days, possibly 180 days, you would be able to reduce the cost. The problem with that cost reduction is that you're not going to see it. In fact, it will cost you more money, because there is severance payments, and some people would have to also be given additional payments for them to get off of payroll. It means that initially there would even be higher spending. But the long-term effect, we know, is going to be great. So essentially, that's why I said the conversation about inflation is going to be an extremely difficult one. You have to be balancing the macro elements with the micro consequences, plus also what we need to do structurally as a nation to address it. Now, the thing is that all of these will point us towards the medium to long term. And let's not say at the cost of what may affect us today or tomorrow, we should forego the longer term effects. So the rational thing to do is to do the right things. At the same time, we should also be cognizant of the challenges that it presents. And all stakeholders need to be around the table so that they know and the government knows that there are going to be an immense amount of sacrifice that need to come along if we want to build a better country for our children and our grandchildren.
Yes, Mr. Booker, still on the conversation on transparency and accountability from the current administration, it would need to run the economy, and we've been told that debt-to-revenue ratio is is hovering around 73.5%, and if you calculate the debt adding ways and means, it's somewhere around over 80 trillion. Should we be asking questions, demanding a huge dose of honesty from the administration about how it intends to run the economy in the absence of, funds, from crude oil sales, which is diminishing, and, harmonizing non-oil sources also?
So two things. In regards to the debt to revenue, we are in a very dire situation. However, if we can actually even take some of those domestic debt elements and securitize it into a long-term bond of some kind, I've seen countries issuing 100 and 120-year bonds. That can do a number of things. One is that, we know we have an obligation to pay, but it would be better to the purse, to the national purse, because it will then substantially reduce that percentage that is so hard for us to do anything. And with the breather, with that space, what we need to do as a nation is to ensure that whatever budgetary allocation or whatever budgetary policy we need to enact in terms of implementation of our budget, capital should actually take more and should also be done efficaciously in a manner that tells everybody in a very transparent manner that, yes, this money is going to road or airport or rail or whatever. And we know these are catalysts for economic growth. And these are the things that if you input, the multiplier effect is so huge. And it generates a lot of small, medium enterprises around those clusters, such that more jobs would be created, more income would be generated in regards to the average citizen. More taxes would be paid, more taxes would be collected if those leakages are also blocked. So essentially what I'm saying is that, yes, we need to be mindful of the challenges we have, but at the same time, we need to do what I would call actualizing that so-called Nigerian word that had been beaten to death, potential. I think what we need to do as a nation is to just, take the bull by the horn and ensure that some of these things just require the necessary political will to do them.
Are you saying that there is still some credit amid the huge debt? Are you optimistic about funds to run the economy?
Indeed, what happens is that once you start doing all the right things, you will get friends, because success is determined by the hard work you put into those things. And when you open yourself up, there will be input coming in. And because with the FX situation, all we need is clarity. How is it going to be done and all of that. And I think the market is finding its way. But when you look at the BOS Securities report or JP Morgan report or one or two others that have come out in the last few weeks, it indicates that certain things in the economy are perceived by potential external investors as the right moves. Now, those are good signals, and we need to capitalize on those. And how you do that, and how you engage and communicate with people that have surplus of funds, globally speaking now, indicates whether it's global or domestic, by the way, because deposit money banks have a lot of their deposits quarantined by the former central bank governor in terms of the discretionary CRR. So even though officially the CRR is 32.5%, for every 100 naira that comes into the bank, 32 naira 50 cents is kept and quarantined in the central bank. That's the official statement. But guess what? The average right now, if you survey the banks, and I don't have the data by the way, I'm just guessing, it's probably around 60%. That means that for every 100 naira, the bank's 60 naira is not with the bank. So, and you're now telling the bank to lend that 40 naira or to even lend up to 65 loan to deposit ratio. There is no way in edge that somebody can afford to pull those margins. So essentially, that's probably why you see high interest rates, and the banks are fearful of having defaults. So in which case they may not end up not even lending at all. And so all of those relief valves would happen. They will have an effect on inflation, but at the same time, they will also be in a position to make us an investment and savings destination. And all of those conflagration of forces can actually put us in the right trajectory of a higher GDP growth. Now, of course, I keep saying that, as a government that cares about the social welfare of the average citizen, there has to be a balancing act on the micro level.
It's good to know that we have some potential, at the domestic level to solve some of these problems. Let me quickly come to you, Dr. Ekele, to find out, first of all, if you agree with him, but also to take a brief look about the conversation on the FX. It's a huge one because of its effects on, the economy at the macro level. All right, I'm told Dr. Keller is not there. Okay, so perhaps you'll take that, Mr. Booker, as well. It seems as if it will get worse before it will get better, following the floating of the Naira. The Naira has depreciated. The last check was about 740 Naira to the dollar. And, some have said that this would lead to a further dollarization of the economy. And on the flip side, it is said also that economic agents would not want to invest their money in a destination where the Naira has, a very weak store in value. What are your thoughts on this?
I think what's going to happen is basically somebody has gone through the BOA securities report. It basically indicates, and it's basically one person's opinion or one firm's opinion. Generally speaking, the way I see it is that it is the beginning of the conversation about whether a foreign portfolio investor or even a foreign direct investor ought to consider Nigeria as a destination versus an alternative market within the African continent. Now, the things that would make a person bring money to Nigeria are the advantages we naturally have, not only just the resources and the raw material and what have you, but we also have a high population, a young population growing, and therefore, if the macro is sorted out well, it means that there would be funds that these people would be using to buy, the essential products and services.
Right.
So essentially, when you look at that, and you look at the fact that there is also a large educated manpower, and therefore all the input resources are in existence, and the market is there, and so essentially it makes us be seen as the right place to be. Now, the signaling that comes from government, the policy and policy clarity,
indeed,
and the communication and the engagement would basically bring that to the surface, because the fact that the initial pronouncements were accepted doesn't mean that they will then be wiring funds into the country. No.
Right.
They would probably, if you have 100, you might probably send one to see how things happen. And then next you might send 5. And then before you know it, they begin to come in drops.
Well,
I don't see much until probably next year in terms of the inflows as a result of the policies.
Well, some have called this period.
Looks good.
Some have called this period the honeymoon. Some say, well, there's no time for honeymoon for governments at different levels. But I mean, the coming days will be definitely very, very important. I'd like to thank you so much, Mr. Kerry Booker, former chairman, NESG, that's the Nigeria Economic Summit Group, and CEO Africa Operations INLAX Limited, joining us from Maiduguri. Thank you so much for your time. We also spoke with Dr. Paul Ikele. The connection is quite shaky, so we've since lost him as registrant CEO of Institute of Business Development. Thank you as well for your contribution to this conversation. We'll take a quick break now, and when we return, our conversation is sort of convergence between the politicians and the people to ensure good governance. You don't want to miss this. Stay with us.
It is a room filled with international NGOs, donor partners, civil society organizations, election observers, development partners, as well as officials of the Independent National Electoral Commission. They have gathered at the behest of the Nigerian Civil Society Situation Room as the group presents its final report on observations during the 2023 general elections.
We're quite disappointed with what came out because we think we had the capacity to have done better. And we are still asking the INEC chairman to apologize to Nigerians because of the electoral issues. you know, because of technology. We demand for an apology because we asked the INEC chairman if the electoral process, if the technology will work. This election was about technology, but his technology was disappointing.
Other stakeholders also air their opinions on the wrongs the electoral umpire needs to right moving forward, albeit there is a dissenting voice to the group's overall stand.
One must explain to Nigerians why transmission of presidential election results face technical glitches. Every other result, senatorial, House of Rep, well, there were so many, some modicum of transmission. But that one.
Ready for observers is key, because for us to deliver, even as observers, we need to understand what the electoral process is. We saw observers on the field acting as monitors, not even understanding what they were supposed to do there.
For me, those parts of the report about apologizing to INEC and all of those things are the personal statements of those who it is not included in the report.
The electoral umpire, represented by the National Commissioner in charge of Information and Voter Education, Mr. Festus Okoye, admits there were challenges and wants Nigerians to look forward to better polls in the future.
There are a lot of positives from the election. There are also challenges from the election. Based on those challenges, we are going to look at the reports from domestic and international election observers. We're also going to look at reports from political parties. We're also going to look at reports from our own electoral officers, from collation officers and returning officers. And we are going to see whether there are issues and things that we can deal with administratively, and we deal with those ones. We can also see whether there are still issues that demand both legal and constitutional change or reform. Then we will go before the appropriate organ of government and deal with those ones.
Lessons have been learned, recommendations made, and reports presented. Nigerians will hope that these will be put in perspective when future elections are conducted. Victor Matthias, Channels Television News.
So the 2023 elections have come and gone. Well, we still have some, how do you call it now, pockets of elections in the state around November.
Yeah, off-season.
Off-season elections. Yeah. But the general elections have come and gone with mixed reactions. Some say, oh, horrible. Some say good. INEC, through its spokesperson, Mr. Festus Okoye, has said that there are more positives than negatives, and all of this will still be looked at to improve on the election process. But at the end of the day, the most important thing is, can the electorate deliver their votes and see those votes get to the destination that they want them to get to? To help us understand and look at the 2023 elections vis-a-vis the reports that have come in, the latest being that from the European Union is Mr. James Ugochukwu, Executive Director, African Center for Entrepreneurship Development and Information Development, immediate past co-convener, Nigeria Civil Society Situation Room, election analyst and good governance advocate. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Ugochukwu.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Also here is Dr. Yabagi Sani, who's the national chairman of Inter-Party Advisory Council. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
So let's start with you. Seeing that you have all the parties working with you here, and you'll probably be speaking for all the political parties. So let's just ask you, in your own observation, what would you say the 2023 elections are like?
Well, you know, like you rightly said, from the political party's point of view, we see 2023 elections as the cup that is half full. Others like to see it as half empty. So we believe there's a chance. And like you know, democracy is a journey. It's not a destination. So where we are today, all we can do is to assemble all those things that happened. Where did we get it wrong? Where did we get it right? What do we need to do in order to improve on the system? And I think, like even the court cases, they are also part of the process. How to strengthen the process. Nations are not built overnight. and election is about building a nation, forming a government. And therefore, if you also weigh it against the dichotomies that we have in this country, which are real, you ignore it at your peril. Issues of religion, issues of ethnicity, issues of regional sentiments and things like that. These are real elements in our politics that perhaps, even if they have it in other countries, they do not play such predominant role as we have it in Nigeria. And these things, the cumulative effect of it is what you saw play out, especially in the 2023 elections, even from the primaries. Some of us that conducted such primaries, we know what happened. It's about who is this person. It's not so much what can he deliver. And that's the reality of Nigeria, whether you want to believe it or not. Because you have to satisfy those, ones you call primordial sentiments, and which we have come to use as a yardstick to measure the person. Up to the, when government forms. Even like today, President Ashwaju, Bola Tinubu is trying to, put his government together. People are waiting to see how much has he done in terms of, assuaging the fears of other ethnic groups. Because other ethnic groups are afraid that, okay, a Yoruba man has come to the scene now. Is he going to be a Yoruba, government, or is it going to be a Nigerian government? You know what happened in the last administration. It was all about a particular ethnic group, that was driving the whole process, by and large. And today, what is emerging from even Aswaju's administration seems to show that kind of sentiments, dancing to the issue of ethnicity. So people are now waiting. How does he balance it, in the cabinet formation? Cabinet formation, of course, he has little or no option, but to satisfy the constitutional requirements that every state you must have at least one minister, isn't it? But then there are other key appointments that will come, And if these appointments do not reflect, the aspiration of Nigerians, what is the aspiration of Nigerians? To now be able to look at things from their real and merit, aspect of it, so that we can get it right, quickly.
Dr. Sani, you seem to have moved away from the election itself. You're already moving very quickly.
I'm talking about the election. The EU report, you mentioned the EU report.
Indeed.
There are other reports we have here.
Yeah.
I said, people looking at it, will see it as cup half, empty.
Well,
we are saying it's cup half full, because what is happening in Nigeria is not anything that is extraordinarily different from what you see even in the United States of America, where Trump is still claiming that the mandate was stolen from him. We've seen what is happening also in some other African countries. Sierra Leone just had an election. It wasn't.
Is it a question of half? Because some people are saying that if it were half, maybe it might be a little more easy to decide. Some people think that it's about cup 3/4 full and cup 1/4 empty. Or cup, filled up 1/4, as the case might be. In other words, INEC promised a full cup, or perhaps deliver just a quarter of the cup that was. And INEC is saying, no, there were more positives in this election than negatives. Do you agree with INEC?
To an extent, I agree with INEC. And I blame Nigerians themselves. Ourselves. We should blame ourselves. Here you are. You now put somebody in charge of such a sensitive, assignment like conducting elections for this country, and you allow one person to appoint everybody that will supervise that election. And this person is a key player. He's also a very strong player in the game. You allow Mr. President to appoint the INEC. Not only does he appoint INEC, also the national commissioners, and even the man that is supervising it at the state level, and down the line like that. And you expect INEC to play magic. What kind of magic can they? These people are also interested in their own welfare too. It's a human nature tendency. So what I'm talking about is that we have to look at the fundamentals. And the fundamentals here, which we know, that's why I say we blame ourselves as Nigerians. West report has talked about these things. Every other report that, even the EU and all, they also mention, things in that respect, that not transparency, the fundamentals were not properly in place. So the point I'm making is that Nigeria should, and especially the National Assembly, Mope, you are aware what happened before we even got what they call, which now has turned out to be a kind of swindle. When the National Assembly said they gave us automatic transfer, of
transmission of results.
Transmission of results from the polling unit. You know how much Nigerians had to fight. Before they had to go and bring somebody from who has no relevance to what we're talking about, that to come and prove what is not right, that is right. I'm talking about the capabilities of the network. We know that in the farthest bush that you can talk about, you can use FRIAR, you can use other RTUs that are enabled by way of satellite. You can transmit data, wherever you are in this world today.
But you maintain...
So the point I'm making is
you maintain in spite of
ourselves.
that. Yeah, you maintain in spite of that you agree with INEC that there are more positive than negatives. We'll come to, what makes you see more positives in a moment. But let me take the point of Mr. Ogochukwu. It's been a very interesting season for you. I mean, it's now the season of reports. We've seen that done by the Situation Room, which didn't come without its own fair share of controversy. I mean, as you saw in that particular report. And you see INEC, consistently saying, look, there were more positives in these elections than there were negatives. From your own assessment, where you sit, what are your thoughts on it?
Well, to answer your question succinctly, we in the civil society, we look at it from a dispassionate angle. Prior to the election in December 2021, we launched a threshold, towards the 2023 election. And the idea behind the threshold is to look at all the stakeholders in this election. It's like a test for every stakeholders. And our report now is the scorecard for it. You look at it now, we've started this thing from 2015. It's 2015 report, it's 2019 report, and this is 2023 report. Now, the challenge we have here is that we have a system that don't really take the civil society very seriously when we make a recommendation. And of course, maybe it's this perception that the civil society people don't know what they are doing. But for information, people in the civil society are professionals in different fields before they venture into this call to reform the society. Now, when we release our report, it's based on empirical evidence, because the Situation Room will have different organizations that do serious data analysis. So everything we are saying is evidence-based. So whatever INEC view is, as far as this election is concerned, our report, we stand by it that this is what we were able to gather as a situation, and which is INEC failed the credibility threshold we gave them in various aspects. And of course, the whole details is, contained in the report there. And not only INEC, every other stakeholders. National Assembly, for instance, now. I remember during the appointment of the President Electoral Commissioners, who cried out loud to high heaven that, look, some of these your electoral commissioners who want to approve or appoint, they have political leanings. Some of them are biased, some of them are card-carrying members of political parties, but they still went ahead to, appoint those people to those positions. On the part of INEC, from 2015 to 2019 to even from 2011 elections, already be crying about the result collation process as the weakest link of the electoral process, making serious recommendations, which were never taken into cognizance or taken seriously. Then, when they brought the issue of beavers and IREV, okay, this is a game changer. That, okay, this time around, we are departing from the norms to something new. So we had high hope about it. Of course, most Nigeria, can assure you, came out to vote because they believe that this particular technology is going to be a game changer. They are going to vote, and they believe that their votes are going to be, the result is going to be the reflection of what they voted. But, on the election day, on the presidential election, presidential and national assembly election day, we had this jolting surprise that people cannot upload results in the RF portal. And then when you see the results being uploaded, you see some of them mutilated, some very blurry. And you'll be asking your question if the INEC ad hoc staff and the other officials undergo any training at all for them to be coming up with such kind of competent output. So for us, we stand by our statement that INEC failed in some aspects. Of course, they did well in some aspects. In terms of accreditation of voters and all that, they did very well. That's the Beavers machine. It worked very well. And of course, we'll be monitoring the Beavers machine from the introduction, from when they started in off-cycle election in Ekiti, Ondo, what do you call it, Osun State, and Anambra. We checked all those things. During those times, the turnaround time of the Beavers machine is about 5 minutes or so. But in the general election, it took less than 1 minute to accredit voters and get them vote. Then
I'm going to have to ask you to hold your thoughts. We will come back and discuss more on the merits and demerits of the 2023 elections. In just a moment, please stay with us. Welcome back. You're still watching Sunrise Daily, coming to you here from our Abuja studios and also from our studios in Lagos. Right here in our studios in Abuja, we have two guests, Dr. Yabagi Sani, who is the National Chairman of the Inter-Party Advisory Council, IPAC, and also Mr. James Ugochukwu, Executive Director, African Center for Entrepreneurship Development and Information Development, a mouthful. Well, we're talking about the 2023 elections, the reports that have come out so far, INEC's response to it, talking about how they believe that there were more positives than negatives from the elections. You were talking about some of the positives. You talked about Beavers and how the turnaround time was far shorter than what we had seen in off-cycle seasons. But we also know that there were issues such as late deployment of materials in many parts of the country. How did negatives like this contribute to hampering the positives that we could have reaped from, say, the fast turnaround time of the Beavers?
Well, it's a case of having a climax and anti-climax. For instance, now, the turnaround time of the Beavers was fast, but INEC brought an anti-climax by, late deployment of men and materials. And the question we keep asking is, what is it that is always holding INEC on election day on deploying materials to locations on a day that the whole place will be shut down? There's no vehicular movement, there's no human movement, the whole road is free, but yet you cannot still move items from one point to the other. A case in point is in Abuja, for instance. We have one of the best road networks in the country, but right here, in some places in Amak here, INEC couldn't start election till midnight of the election day. So the question we're asking is, how can people maximize the turnaround time of Beavers when they are not even available? The INEC are not available there to conduct the election. It's got a lot of people turned out to vote, and they went back home out of frustration. So it becomes an anti-climax in his own stead. Then the other point is, during the transmission, we had challenges of not being able to transmit presidential results. We were able to transmit that of National Assembly result. The question we're asking is, why did we have that kind of discrepancies or technical glitches on election day, despite all the assurances that the Beavers and the RF machine is a game changer? Of course, we've confirmed that it's a game changer in the off-cycle election I've mentioned, because during the Osun, Ekiti, and other off-cycle election, before 12 midnight, about 90 or 98% of the results are already available on the RF portal. So the question is, what went wrong this time around? I'm
a little curious also about the process. You mentioned the fact that late deployment of materials continues to be an issue for INEC, and something really needs to be done about that. But Are we also forgetting the context? And this is not making any excuses for INEC, but we do recall that in that period, Naira was scarce. Petrol was also a scarce commodity in that season. Do you think, I mean, with the analysis that has been done so far, did any of these external challenges come to play, come to feature in the post-election reports we're seeing?
Well, if I can recall, the INEC officials or chairman, they had a meeting with the central bank governor during that time frame. And the central bank governor gave them all the assurances that every support they need will be given to them. That is checked. Then, when it comes to the fuel scarcity, yes, we know we are going to have an election on a particular day. This is national election. This is Nigeria National Petroleum Corporation. The president is the Minister of Petroleum. I don't think INEC should have any issue having fuel.
No, I'm just saying that did any of this in the post-election analysis, did we find, for instance, it's one thing for them to, INEC promised that they were going to upload results on IRAF. They did not upload the results, at least not at that time, you know, on election day. I'm saying that did we find that maybe in the process, maybe some of these promises that were made were not quite fulfilled in all sectors? Did that constitute any challenge in the analysis that has been done so far?
Of course, ordinarily it will constitute a challenge because, for instance, now, that of cash now, at least INEC has not been able to tell us that they were not able to pay their vendors. We've not had that report or the ad hoc staff or all those ones. But the question we're asking ourselves is, okay, if we didn't have any problem paying them, why is it that they couldn't deploy these materials to where they're supposed to be at the right time?
So you suspect that they could have had those kinds of challenges?
So what you are saying now is that we cannot place where the challenge is coming from, apart from logistic lapses. Because one thing is to hire somebody to do something. The other challenge is for you to oversight how the person do the whole thing. So if you give somebody money and you don't oversight how the person do something, it will mess up the process for you.
At the end of the day, if you look at some of the recommendations made by the EU, for instance, where they talked about ambiguity in the laws and then setting up a publicly accountable system. You talked about the way INEC personnel are recruited, and one of the phrases you used was about the welfare system. It's about a welfare thing. So if the two of you can weigh in on this, ambiguity in the law, we do remember a senior advocate of Nigeria, Lisa Bakoba, talked about the ambiguity in the law in terms of the 25% for the FCT. That's one area. There are some other areas he talked about. What should we be looking at going forward? I mean, 2023 is out. We have the pocket elections coming up in November. Well, what should we be looking at as we go forward? The National Assembly is coming in. What should they begin to look at immediately to see that our electoral process gets better? The two of you can weigh in on this, well, even as it includes the recruitment process.
Yeah, well, I think accountability is what we should look out for. Accountability, because even from what we have said about issue of money, fuels, you know, these were man-made problems, deliberately, and the person who did it did not hide it. They were even flaunting it on the television that they are doing this in order to checkmate, you know, the so-called politicians and what have you. But look at the kind of hardship it's introduced. Look at the kind of how it sabotaged even the election itself. So accountability. And if people can get away with this kind of things in a system that we are aspiring, we are hoping that it's going to be, you know, we are going to be leaders, you know, which we're
you know, that part of sabotaging the elections, some people argue with it because INEC did not complain that sabotage.
I'm not talking about INEC. I'm talking about those who even appoint, you know, those who put INEC in place. I'm talking about the presidency itself. You know, the presidency should be called to account, because this Naira, no, what was it that you want to change the Naira for? What is it? Nothing. No economic sense in what they did. There is no economic sense in making fuel not to be available, you know, all over the place to facilitate the elections. We, the political parties, were not happy. You know, we're angry, and somebody should be called to account. There should be accountability. You know, central bank governor, NNPC, GMD or GSC or whatever they call them should be called to account. Why? Why did you allow this thing to happen at the time that Nigeria is being, put together, because that's putting together the whole nation. That's what elections are about. So I believe that accountability is one thing that we must, ensure that we look out for in the build-up to other elections.
Okay, Mr.
And also in INEC too. Why didn't INEC follow their own guidelines? If you put a guideline in place and you keep telling people that these guidelines are what you are going to use, and you are actually using them, because I remember we political parties suffered, at the time we were trying to upload, our candidates. INEC stuck to their rules, as that this is not something negotiable at all. So what happened when it matters? So these, there should be accountability.
Okay. So go to quickly before our colleagues in Lagos will have some questions.
The first thing that needs to be done is for independent audit of the election to be carried out by the National Assembly. Independent in the sense that you can't be asking INEC to audit themselves. You can't go through an exam and score yourself and grade yourself. So an independent audit needs to be carried out on how the election went. Then number two, we need to go back to Uwe's report in terms of picking the leadership of INEC. Just as a doctor said, we cannot be having a football match and one person will be picking the referee. That should stop. And that is what the next point I'm going to make is legislation. Need to change all that. And in terms of picking INEC President Electoral Commission, it shouldn't be something that we do at random. At times we pick somebody that has no knowledge of electoral process and you put the person there. I think it shouldn't be a political appointment. We have state directors in different INEC INEC state offices. So those ones should be, upgraded to a resident electoral commission towards election. It should be an open process where these people will be accountable to the people, not to the government. Because if you pick somebody as INEC as a president, don't expect the person not to be loyal to the president. It's as simple as that. So that should be changed. And that was what the Waste report recommended, but it was thrown away by the assembly of that particular period. Then the next thing is for punitive measure to be taken against people that are found wanting. Because of all the things that happened during the election, if nobody is arrested and nobody is punished for it, people will do worse than that in the next election, and we shouldn't expect anything to change.
All right, let's go to Lagos where our colleagues Kade and Buki have some questions. Guys.
Right. Let me start with Mr. Yabagi Sani. And I mean, that point has been made about the true independence of INEC. Some will say that wouldn't you be expecting too much from a commission that, yes, the name is independent, but all of the appointment has been said. Even you've heard cases where politicians influence the recruitment of ad hoc staff, and you wonder, what do you expect from the ad hoc staff anyway? They'll just naturally do the bidding. So it's like going against the nature of the commission itself, and particularly in terms of appointment. So if recommendations will be made, by the way, I don't know how much of these recommendations will kick in before the off-cycle elections we have later this year, but there's no harm in trying, and I imagine that the 10th Assembly can move swiftly in that regard. So who should then be responsible for the appointments?
Well, I believe that the appointments, I think the suggestion by West report is that NJC, Nigerian Council should handle it, and that it should be advertised, and that it should be a transparent process, so that people can see exactly the person that has been appointed. Of course, after the process, it could National Assembly can now come in and then ratify for other reasons of giving it the legal teeth that it's supposed to have. Otherwise, we will continue to be in this vicious cycle, and we'll be punishing the wrong people because, like we have said, time and again, that it is not really the fault of those who you today have in INEC. It is the system itself, the system we put in place. That is what's responsible for all these things we are talking about. So when people talk about punishing somebody, somebody apologizing, no, It's us, Nigerians. Let's change the system. Let's change the system itself of appointing people, and then things will begin to now, be in the proper direction. If we don't do that, there's no way anything will change. Even if you put somebody, you can take even an angel there. If the system is not proper, there's no way the person can operate and then give you the results that you want. So we need to go back to the drawing board and really change the system of putting the personnel that we put in INEC to supervise the conduct of the elections.
Indeed.
So that is number one that we must do. National Assembly, I'm sure, has their job cut out for them, to ensure that happens.
Indeed, we hope that that will not be a gigantic hurdle to cross in terms of recommending appointments for officials of the Commission. Let's take another look at some of the grey areas identified by the European Union, one of which, apart from identifying ambiguity in appointments, is also ensuring real-time publication and access to election results. And even though the Electoral Act as amended has, allowed electronic transmission of results, but we still see that element within the electoral process where at the Commission's headquarters and at the State Electoral Commission's headquarters for INEC, officials are waiting collation officers, the arrival of results from collation officers. How important or significant is that to the complaints about the results transmitted to IREV portal, particularly where opposition parties are identifying variation in results, comparing notes with what they have and what is found on INEC portal? How can we correct this, even though the Electoral Act has stipulated electronic transmission of results? That's for you, Mr. Ugochukwu. Okay. In the build-up to the 2023 election, you remember that the Electoral Act underwent a lot of tinkering, which produced the 2022 Electoral Act. And part of the major issue that was contended strongly then at the National Assembly was the electronic transmission of results. Of course, it was test-run after the passage, and we saw that this is a game changer. Now, the idea behind having that electronic transmission of results is to ensure that people can now see that the result of election reflected what they voted. Now, the challenges we had in the 2023 general election is that maybe INEC did not train the ad hoc staff very well, which resulted in them mutilating the part of the election result or even uploading blurry pictures to the IREV portal. And you remember that in the Electoral Act, this case that was made, I've forgotten that particular clause, that in case where there's a contention or so, that the result in the IREV portal would take preeminent. But with what we are seeing now, I wonder how that is going to play out. So what INEC should be looking at now is training the ad hoc staff to ensure that after the election, the result uploaded and the result they have as hard copy from EC8A are one and the same. And of course, any ad hoc staff that is found uploading mutilated report will be, punished seriously, made to face the law to the point of even fines or imprisonment. If that is not done, we'll keep on having these particular issues that we're having. So the problem is not the technology. The problem is not the IREV portal. The problem is the people manning it. And if they are not well trained, I think INEC should step up their activities to ensure that these guys are well trained before deploying them to the field.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you.
There's something to take note of. It's not so much
in 10 seconds.
Yeah, in 10 seconds. It is the fact that the collation itself is still left manual, that it's done manually. And if it is done manually, then it can be influenced.
So it should be automated.
Yeah, automated, exactly.
Thank you so much. Mr. James Ugochukwu is Executive Director, Africa Center for Entrepreneurship Development and Information Development. Immediate PASCO convener.
Center for Entrepreneurship and Information Development.
Okay, for Entrepreneurship and Information Development. Immediate PASCO convener, Nigeria Civil Society Situation Room, and Election Analyst and Good Governance advocate, and Dr. Yabagi Sani, National Chairman of the Inter-Party Advisory Council. Thank you both for coming in this morning.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And just before we go, your mails. Okay.
Indeed, we have this one from Henry Okeke talking about improving Nigeria's electoral process. You say elections and electoral commission are guided by legal frameworks. Therefore, it behoves on the 10th National Assembly to prioritize the process of amendments to the 2022 Electoral Act with a proactive approach to eliminate loopholes, ad hominem legislation provisions in the Act. Oh, that's your mail.
And this one is coming from Berla Crownfit, and he or she is drawing our attention to something important. They say, kindly help to pass the information to all parents, guardians in Lagos and beyond that they should warn their kids not to board just any vehicle when going to school. My heart bleeds or bled this morning when I saw a group of children boarding a black Jeep with no number plate and with tinted glass. I was about to enter a car packed in front of me, and my colleague had to shout that he should not enter into, to the extent that the driver was looking at us. He persuaded some to enter while some refused to join them. Well, security, that speaks to the security situation in the state, and not just in the state, across the entire length and breadth of the country.
Indeed. And that's where we wrap it up on the show this morning. I also got a case of someone who was kidnapped right in the middle of Lagos alongside others. This is a story we'll be following, but it's important to ensure safety from the security agencies and, people as well. I'm Kayode Okikelu. Thank you for being a part of the show this morning.
I'm Bukola Kuka. Ensure you enjoy the rest of your weekend.
And indeed, continue to be your brother's keeper. Look out for your neighbor and your neighbor's children. Thank you for watching. I'm Maope Ogun Yusuf.
And I'm Nell Taigbe. Bye-bye.